arguably some of the people to be exploring the value of digital objects prior to any cryptocurrencies. And so we should, and I think are, amongst the early adopters and believers. We weren't, or at least I personally was not one of the first on board. Actually, some of my staff were amongst the very first on board, but I myself kind of saw it initially as a curiosity, as potentially, or at least hypothetically, inevitable over the long haul. But I didn't choose to kind of jump in and either become a miner or even a holder or provide places to spend the Bitcoins in the first year. And mostly I just think because it wasn't big enough to have kind of hit my radar. Then it was actually my wife, who is in the finance field, who began to be researching it more and began to encourage me to take this more seriously and kind of weigh in as to what someone who should be able to give it a little more intuitive understanding than she could to have an opinion. And so my first opinion, as I began to look at it, I began to go, well, actually, this can and really should and is working. So we can then convert it to going like, okay, well, if this is all working, we need to find ways to participate. And there's really kind of 2 or 3 ways to participate. Of course, you could mine. Of course, you could hold some coins. And of course, you could accept Bitcoins in your business and things of this nature. Well, of course, for me as a business, even though I'm the founder of the company, I really need to sell the team on the importance of accepting Bitcoin as one of the ways to take value into our game. And I'm sure we'll get there. We're solving other problems right now of just getting the game online first. But I'm confident we will ultimately take Bitcoins within the game itself. But then as I said, okay, I also would like to buy some. Then I immediately ran into the nightmarish problems of buying my first Bitcoins. And the reason why I call it nightmarish is that we were already to the era where anybody trading any of the exchanges were concerned about things like money laundering worries. And so they demanded you send in bank statements and bills and driver's licenses and maybe even videos of yourself to prove who you were. And so it took me a long time to actually just buy a Bitcoin. And I thought, okay, well, normal humans are never going to get through that process. The man on the street, woman on the street are not getting through that. And then I said, okay, well, now I've got some Bitcoins. Let's go spend some. So I went to go look at the maps of where I could spend my Bitcoins. And, here in where I'm talking to you from right now is our New York home. And, there's one bar that's about 5 or 6 blocks from here that takes Bitcoins. And so I've had it on my agenda to go over there, but I've still never been. And I've spent a few Bitcoins on some things on purpose, but none of them were yet essential. And a lot of my peers have done things like whether that's Virgin Galactic or Tesla, selling some seats or cars for some Bitcoins. Those are great. And I'm pleased that many of the companies I've either invested in or helped get started, are also now accepting Bitcoins. But it strikes me there's kind of 2 things that, I'll call it 3 things that we just need to see happen in Bitcoins that I think is going to really open the floodgates to not just those of us that are hackers and nerds, but to the common man, so to speak. And those are the 3 steps of one is, we still have to make it much easier to understand and acquire what a Bitcoin is and get one in your quote pocket, proverbial pocket. 2 is, even though once I now have things like CoinJar or other places to hold a local Bitcoin in my phone or other things, now that those work, it's easy, but sussing out which one to use and why and whether it's safe or not and how to link it up took more time than I think the casual users are capable of doing. And then finally, we really have to get not just those big name or, the highly visible transactions of these, the newsworthy transactions taking Bitcoins, but really, get it down to taxi cabs in New York and your street corner cafe. And to me, those are all technology issues. Those are all software issues. All those are solvable right now, today, with just good software in front of it. And so that's why I'm kind of looking at Bitcoin myself going, we are, a hair's breadth away from having a user experience that lets me acquire and hold and spend in a way that the masses can do. And once we have that, I think Bitcoin will, it's already had a pretty meteoric last year, but I think we have an even bigger meteoric year ahead once we get some of these software problems taken care of.
So I have two things. One, I think that the software problem is an interesting one because in Bitcoin, the thing that we've had to this point is a difficult time bringing in talent that can actually execute on this stuff. And so most of the time what you get is the repurposing of technology that was already out there. You look at the earliest exchanges, Mt. Gox, and, that stands for Magic the Gathering Online Exchange. And, they've been having trouble in this last couple of weeks. And I kind of like to, people ask me sometimes what the problem with Mt. Gox is. And as far as I can tell, it doesn't matter sometimes how good or how much money you spent on your blender. It's just not going to make a good airplane, and the crew probably wouldn't know how to fly it even if it did. So it seems like all of these are legacy issues caused by nobody believing this thing was going to work at first, and the players who had the resources in order to deliver on the type of experience that you're talking about here they were like, why would I want to bother with this? Now, the second point is my first time I didn't buy Bitcoin was about 3 years ago this month when I didn't send several $100s worth of cash in an envelope to a guy in Washington, D.C. named Bitcoin Morpheus. He then went on to, turns out totally legit, but that was the process at the point that I first got involved with Bitcoin. And so I totally agree with what you're saying. It's been a slow rise, as far as adoption on the ground has been concerned. But I think a lot of that has been because the critical mass that you need in order to make money work simply hasn't been present in any physical locations outside of a few places, like maybe the Kreuzberg district of Germany, for example. But outside of that, the internet really is the place. And so it's these first services that are coming online, WordPress, that's all fine and stuff. But the stuff that's happened in the last 6 months, and more importantly, the companies that'll come on in the next 6 months, I think are opening the door and saying, all of you other companies that don't know what's going on or don't necessarily trust this thing, we have enough faith in it. We've looked into it. It's working for us. I don't know if you just saw, but Overstock just announced that they're actually going to be giving a 1% discount to all orders paid in Bitcoin indefinitely starting in 4 weeks. So, there are such advantages to this stacked up that it really feels like it's very much a matter of time and normality, right? This has to become normal before the average person will use it, much more than it has to become usable.
Yeah, totally agree. And that normality is it. And while I agree that Overstock is a great champion for this and is going to help a lot, I also think that when you describe the word normal, it has to be normal in the sense of the frequency with which any of us who are using it, it has to be something we can and do use daily.
Right.
And that's why I'm going the taxi cab or the corner cafe or, get it onto our, even though Apple won't like it, get it onto our iTunes store and Amazon and everybody else. We need to, whatever it is, wherever you spend money daily, the goal should be to make sure that one of the places you contact every day, it takes Bitcoins. And at that point, I think that the dominoes will start falling on their own.
So let's talk about the future for a second. The problems that surround Bitcoin at this point are basically in two categories. They are user experience and they are permission based, be it from a regulator or from a country or from, even the IRS is a good example of this. There's a lot of uncertainty, and because of that uncertainty, it's kind of difficult to know what you should do, so people just aren't doing anything a lot of the time. What do you think is a good scenario for Bitcoin moving forward based on as you see things now?
Well, I like the way you outlined it of talking about the two aspects of user experience and regulatory concerns, permissions. What I find interesting about those is the reason why I'm so bullish right now on Bitcoin is that I think both of those are inevitable to be solved. I don't think it is possible to see either one of them utterly fail. And the reason why, even on the regulatory side, where people might say, "Gee, if all the world's banks, and governments ban it, they could stop it." And I'm going, I think we're almost past that point. It's a hard thing to stop because it really has it's like why a lot of people put money into gold and diamonds. It's because the government can't stop you. And so clearly, if governments resist it, it will make adoption slower. It might make it continue to remain more boutique in the long run. But I think at this point, governments since they don't think they can literally outright stop it, are saying it's best to figure out how we can participate in some way or regulate in some way as opposed to resist. And I think they already have that. I think governments are doing just fine as long as, like with banks, anytime you take very large amounts of money in and out of the system, call it $10,000 in value or greater, as long as those giant transactions are made aware to governments, which I think they will demand, then and then I think you save them most of their money laundering concerns, and that it'll go fine. It'll go slowly, but it'll go fine. And then on the adoption side, on the user experience side, because I think that really is just a software problem, then even with the early creators, their tools will get better and better over time. Think of another crowdsourced, heavily used thing right now, like the Linux operating system. When Linux first came out, maybe 20 years ago or longer, a lot of serious developers didn't really use it because it was not as well curated as the quote professional, corporate operating systems and tools. But over time, those tools got better. And now, once the community kind of picked it up and took it on, now those tools are incredibly superior. And there's almost no one in my industry who doesn't use Linux as their professional operating system. Some of us, a lot of people still use Windows for the target because we make games for Windows. But what everybody uses on the backside is pretty much always Linux, and that's a completely crowd-created foundation. So I think that it's hard for me to actually describe a bad scenario. Bad scenarios to me it will go more slowly than we might hope. Bad scenario to me means no one's the user experience is not going to get as good as fast as I think it could easily. And a bad scenario on the other side is governments, especially big governments like if the U.S. or Europe, really make a hard stand against it. But I think those are, unlikely. I think the tools are getting better already fast, not as fast as I like, but plenty fast. And while, China has done a bit of a push-pull on some of their rulings, I still think in the long run, the major governments of the world will come on board.
This has been a really great interview. Thank you again for taking the time with us. I have one last question, kind of taking it back even further from the kind of national government thing, just to the general organizational across the world level. I've been really fascinated with some of the stuff that Gabe Newell has recently been saying, the CEO of Valve. Is he the CEO? I don't actually know if he's the CEO. Anyways, Gabe Newell over at Valve has been saying some very interesting things recently about how Valve is actually the biggest bottleneck in the Valve system, and that the amounts of content, as you said, being created by their player base is actually above and beyond what they can ever even hope to compete with. And so to that end, he's trying to take the company, the Valve company and the Valve platform, to a place where publishing becomes almost more of like a network protocol, where there's a set of rules and a set of network publishing standards, but basically it's just a push process where if you as a game creator have something, or even a software creator, that you want to push through this platform, you can do it. And basically, so long as you follow the rules, Valve doesn't even need to worry about it.
Fascinating, but let me give you another thought mix in there. So I agree that, we've been looking at Steam for the game we're working on as we're debating on how to get it out to the widest possible audience. And so I understand very much what Gabe was saying about Steam and about Valve and how to further democratize it. And I'm a huge proponent of this democratization. Even the crowdfunding we're doing is a big part of this democratization and getting people involved early and letting things float to their natural heights. That being said, that fixes part of distribution. That fixes channel availability. But adoption of whether it's a game or a cryptocurrency requires more than just channel availability. Mm-hmm. Even if you have, like, for example, right now, I don't even know all the cryptocurrencies out there, but I'm sure many of them make the case that they are technically better for a wide variety of reasons than Bitcoin. And the same thing is true in the game industry. Games compared to each other often claim my game is better than somebody else's for a wide variety of maybe real, true reasons. But just channel availability is not what is required for success. And that's one of the things I've learned in the game industry down through these years, is that just making sure that people can download your game does not mean that they will ever see it, does not mean they'll ever think of it, does not mean they'll ever choose to try to play it, even if your game is the best. And that's why just the publishing side is one piece, but the marketing side is just as important, if not more. And, if you look at almost any intellectual properties, companies that make, whether it's Mickey Mouse or Star Wars, you spend about as much in marketing as you do in the development of the product. And a lot of people look at that and go like, well, that wouldn't be true if we had these great democratized platforms of presenting stuff. To which I go, well, that solves half the problem, but you haven't solved the just as important half on the marketing side. And the way I take that back to Bitcoin is I go, I have no idea whether Bitcoin is the best cryptocurrency. And there might be places like the one you were describing for your own internal needs where there are cryptocurrency technology or specifics that would be great for a ecosystem that you are in control of locally. However, if you're talking about the global national cryptocurrency, Bitcoin's already going to be hard to beat. I periodically go over the fence at Litecoins and Feathercoins and some of these others just to make sure I'm not missing something important. And I could be wrong. Maybe one of those will be the ultimate international standard. However, from a marketing standpoint, Bitcoin already has a huge advantage just because of all the press that it gets. If you look at the general public, of which I don't know what percentage of the general public has heard of Bitcoin, but it's a lot more than it was a year ago. If you ask that same group of people, have they heard of any of these other cryptocurrencies, and the ratio goes down fast. And so even if a lot of these other currencies are superior, which they very well may be, I think the marketing lead that Bitcoin has is still high. And so just having, going back to Steam, just having a democratized platform where it's push to publish, that's just the start of the battle. The bigger battle lies ahead, even if you have the best game, to make sure people know about it. And that's more than just publishing.
I totally agree with you. I think that you're completely right there, and I guess I should have shared the rest of his plan with you, because I think that it does address this. You're right. The other thing that needs to happen is you need curation, because if you just have that incredible amount of content, then you'd have all the same problems you were talking about with your, that you were talking about with the music problem you were having with the current game. But the solution, we already talked about that too. It's the dramatic play reviewer who in your game publishes and sells his reviews, or there's a local newspaper or what have you. That's what it is that every venue is that by creating this problem and allowing people to profit from delivering the solution, you create the solution also, or you at least create the situation that brings it into existence. So what Valve is doing with, again, once they roll out these changes, I don't know if they've announced a date for them yet, but he gave this talk last year. He basically said that anyone should be able to open a shop that uses and can sell content from the Steam platform. And so in 2005, my first blog and podcast was called Gamer Andy, and we talked about video games. And I was never able to monetize that. We had 10,000 or so listeners over the course of 3 years, but it was very, very difficult to monetize it. But if Valve had been offering this, then what we would have done on that site is it would have just been a Steam page, a Steam store. And we would have published all the same content, except then whenever someone wanted to buy something that we had chosen to feature, we would have made money from it. So doesn't that solve the problem?
No, I like what you said very early on, especially well, which was if by allowing people to solve that, which ones to go visit and profit by it, then you sort of solve it. And I would even say if your virtual reviewers had virtual magazines where you could also place virtual ads, because as much as people hate advertising, there's an old adage that without advertising something happens. And that is nothing. Something terrible happens, and that is nothing, which is still true, because you still need, and you often can still win, even if the reviewer doesn't like what you want. Sometimes the reviewer's wrong. And if you want to put up your own money to be able to scream into the channel that the reviewer controls by putting an ad through the on the reviewer's site and prove the reviewer wrong, then you should have that opportunity. So you just need to make sure that and by the way, I think that those will self-solve. With what you framed there originally, which is that make sure that the people who can help you sort the good from the chaff also can do it profitably. And once you do, then it'll work itself out.
Sir Richard Garriott, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Adam. Really a pleasure to be with you today. A very enjoyable talk about the current and exciting future we have ahead of us. If anybody's interested in the things that we were talking about, go to www.shroudoftheavatar.com and get involved.
Would you like to buy Bitcoin? Cash into Coins provides the fastest, easiest, and safest way to buy Bitcoin in the United States. Simply place an order online, deposit cash at any supported bank, and relax. Cash into Coins will verify your deposit and send out your Bitcoin within 24 hours. Join tens of thousands of people who have purchased from Cash into Coins. What are you waiting for? Buy your Bitcoin today. Go to cashintocoins.com. That's cashintocoins.com.